It's just me struggling with these books, right? Okay. So I put my top 10 favourite books into ChatGPT and asked it, what does it say about me? And it said, someone who's thoughtful, bold, and imaginative. So thanks, ChatGPT. I'll come to you more often when I want to feel good about myself. I'm Triya, and today I'm going to tell you about my top 10 favourite books of all time. I think the themes that stand out to me the most in books are gender, sex and relationships, dystopia, an exploration of darkness, morality, and race. So with that in mind, let's get into it. So, it was really hard to rank it, but I'm going to try. Number 10 is The Dangers of Smoking in Bed by Mariana Enriquez. Mariana Enriquez is an Argentinian author and a queen of feminist body horror. This is technically a short story collection, not a novel, but it absolutely deserves a spot on this list. The stories in this collection are boundary pushing and spine chilling. One of them, for example, is about a group of fangirls who are so obsessed with a singer that they exhume his dead body and consume his corpse to feel close to him. Yeah, it's that kind of crazy. These stories stick with you long after you've read them. I find myself thinking about them late at night and I can't sleep. If you love feminist horror that explores the grotesque and the psychological, you have to check this out. The next book I want to talk about is Love Marriage by Monica Ali. You may know her as the author of the famous novel Brick Lane, but her most recent book, Love Marriage, is the one that made it to my list. And honestly, it feels like this book was written about me. It follows the story of Yasmin, who is a 26-year-old junior doctor working in London, who is a British-born Bengali. So that is literally me. In this story, she navigates love, family, and culture in a British Indian household. She's engaged to Joe, a fellow doctor who is white. And the book also delves into some really heavy topics like sex addiction, assault, and arranged marriages. It may sound obvious, but representation really matters. It is rare to see people of colour in stories like this, especially in contemporary British literature. What I love most about Love Marriage is how raw and dramatic it is, and it feels so real and relatable, especially if you've ever felt caught between two cultures or struggled to balance tradition with your own identity. Representation is not about just ticking a box. It's about telling stories that matter to people like us. So next on my list is A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. Fun fact, if you are a Lana Del Rey fan, you might recognise the word ultraviolence from her song. Well, the word ultraviolence was actually coined by Burgess in A Clockwork Orange, and it shows how much influence this book has had on pop culture, even decades after it was written. One of the things I love the most about it is that it's written in this made-up language called Nadzad, and you have to decipher it as you go along. I love books that challenge you and books that don't take the reader for granted. You know, you have to work a little bit, but it's really worth it. In case you don't know, the story is set in a dystopian future and it follows a protagonist called Alex. He's a teenage delinquent and the leader of a violent gang. One day, Alex is caught and he is subjected to a controversial experiment called the Ludvigo technique, which is supposed to cure him of his violent tendencies. This book explores themes of free will, morality, and what it means to be human. Next on my list is Dracula by Bram Stoker. So my journey with this book started in primary school when I unknowingly read the abridged version instead of the real version, because primary school children weren't allowed to read the full version because it was too scary. So I was so upset when I realised that it was the abridged version that my parents actually wrote a letter into school that gave me permission to read any book I wanted from the library, so then I went and read the full version. And it was worth it. So Dracula obviously is extremely influential. The book explores the fear of the unknown, sexuality, and power dynamics in such a compelling way. If you've only ever seen Dracula in movies or in pop culture, trust me, the original book is worth the read. It's dramatic, chilling, and timeless. Okay, so keeping with the vampire theme, my next favourite is the Twilight Saga by Stephenie Meyer. These are all the Twilight books. As you can see, the collection is huge, and I have the full physical collection, which I really love. Twilight, New Moon, Eclipse, Breaking Dawn. This is Midnight Sun, which is Twilight from Edward's perspective. Life and Death is the gender-reversed version of Twilight. Official illustrated guide. Let me just say that Dracula walked so that Twilight could run. This series was a massive part of my life as a child, and honestly, I still love it. When I was in primary school, Twilight was so popular amongst my class that it was actually banned from school, but we were resourceful and we'd actually sneak the books into school by putting the sleeves of other books on top of Twilight because we just had to read it at school. It was that big of a deal. My favourite book of the series is Eclipse because Jasper is my favourite character and this book goes into his backstory as well. I know it's really fashionable to hate on Twilight, or at least it was. And yes, there are problematic elements to the series, but it's fun, dramatic, and it gave us an entire era of pop culture. I even threw a Twilight party this summer. It was amazing. So whether you love it or you hate it, you can't deny that Twilight has left its mark on society. And for me, it's a nostalgic favourite that I will always treasure. So my next favourite is A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. As you probably realised, I'm a big fan of sci-fi and dystopia, and this book ticks all the boxes. I read it when I was 15, and it completely blew my mind at the time. The story is set in a future world where society is highly controlled, people are engineered in hatcheries, emotions are suppressed with a drug called soma, and individuality is seen as a threat. It follows a character called Bernard, who begins to question this perfect world, and his journey leads to some pretty dark and interesting places. I have to admit, I'm not sure how well the book would hold up if I reread it today, knowing what I know about the world and feminism, but it's still a classic, and it inspired my love for dystopian stories. So next up is Blonde Roots by Bernardine Evaristo. This book is a retelling of slavery where the narrative is flipped. So in this world, Africans have enslaved Europeans. It's one of those books that stays with you a long time after you've read it. The story follows Doris, who is a European woman who is captured and enslaved. Through her eyes, we see the brutality of slavery. And what I like about this book is it doesn't shy away from the horrors of sexual assault and rape. It's a book that challenges your perspectives while still being really beautifully written. And honestly, I can't recommend it enough. Okay, so now on to the top 3. In third place is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. So the story is told from the perspective of Humbert, who is a paedophile and is deeply obsessed with a 12-year-old girl called Lolita, who he becomes the stepfather of. He is this unreliable narrator who justifies his deep obsession with this young girl. And what I like about this book is that you are supposed to be disgusted by him, no matter what he says. The writing itself is stunning, it's rich and evocative and really beautifully constructed. But it's not a book that you're supposed to enjoy in the traditional sense. Unlike other books that are written from the perspective of the male gaze, I think this book is supposed to disturb you and not just titillate you or titillate the author. An example that comes to mind is a book that I read this year called The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. And that is also a book from the male gaze, but I feel like there was no introspection. None of that was intentional. It was just the author's point of view. But I think Nabokov really takes it further. So yes, Lolita. In second place is Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. This book is wild. I really can't think of any other way to describe it. The story follows a girl called Natsuki who believes that she is an alien and doesn't belong on this earth. This book is about conformity, societal expectations, and the darkest ways that humans cope with not fitting in. The bleak outlook and dystopian themes really resonated with me. It's one of those books that shock you but also make you think. And boy, does it shock you. I'm not going to give it away, but the ending is where things really get crazy. And all I'm going to say is if you do read it, just be careful, don't read it when you're feeling sick or nauseated. And I have read all of Sayaka Murata's books, but this is the one that leaves the strongest memory. And in first place, we have Blindness by José Saramago. Saramago is a Portuguese author, and fun fact, he actually won the Nobel Prize in Literature, which I didn't know until I was researching for this video. Clearly, I'm not the only person that likes this book, but basically it's a dystopian novel that starts with this unexplained epidemic of blindness. So everyone starts going blind, and it's this sort of white blindness. They can only see white. This epidemic spreads rapidly, causing society to collapse. What follows is a horrifying exploration of what happens when humanity loses its moral compass. People very quickly descend into violence, depravity, and madness. I love how this book examines what happens when you take away that thin veneer of civilization and how quickly humans descend into this dark, dirty oblivion. This book is one of those ones that makes you question everything about human nature. It's actually one of the only books that I've ever read more than once. So there you have it, my top 10 all-time favourite books. These are the stories that have stuck with me. I'd love to know what you think. Have you read any of these books and what books are on your top 10? Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you in the next one.